Luke chapter 2, verse 1 to 7. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth, to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. What is the story that we hear at Christmas? Mary and Joseph make their way to Bethlehem because of a census had been decreed. Mary is pregnant and ready to deliver. Joseph tries to find a place for them, and they end up at a stable, alone, because there was no room for them in the inn. That's how we read it every year. But the story is actually different from that. This reading comes from a mistranslation of the word inn. We think Holiday Inn. We think of a place with many rooms and an innkeeper. But that's not what the word means, as we will look at shortly. Also, we have sung for many, many, many years Christmas carols with a 15th century understanding of livestock. The story is actually far grander than what we know. And that's what I want us to explore this morning. But first, we need to tackle the word inn and get a first century understanding of what houses looked like back then. The Greek word translated as inn is unique and only appears one other time in the book of Luke. It refers to a guest room. It is used by Luke again in Luke chapter 22, verse 11. It is in the context of where Jesus is asking his disciples to go and to prepare a place so that he may have the Last Supper with them. And there we read and tell the instruction given to the disciples, and tell the master of the house, the teacher says to you, where is the guest room? That is the same word that is translated as inn in chapter 2 of Luke. Where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? In ancient times, houses would have had a guest room attached to it, where the family would be able to give a place for a traveling person. So we should read this verse. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the guest room. Now, why would there be no room in the guest room? Oh, that's because the house was filled with family. The decree was for all the land, so all of Joseph's family would have been in this house. The guest room would have been a very nice place to deliver a baby. It would have been quiet, but that's not an option. Now you might be thinking, okay, there was no room in the guest room, but the manger would have been outside the house, right? So the story hasn't really changed. Well, here's where our modern perspective betrays us. We think manger, we think barn. We think barn, we think outside, and that makes sense to us. But in first century life, small animals were often kept inside the home at night. The night that Jesus was born, he was surrounded by all sorts of people. And this is something we will continue to see in his life. And I want to explore this with you. So who would have been in the house as Mary was giving birth? Well, you would have had Joseph, Jesus' earthly father, who was there to support his wife. How much support? We are not sure, but it's surprising how supportive a husband can be in these times. You also would have had Joseph's mother. She would have been there to help with the delivery. You also would have had Joseph's family, maybe brothers, maybe sisters, who would have been there to help and to rejoice in the birth of this new baby.
Now, Joseph comes from a working class family. We know that Joseph comes from a carpenter family because he was a carpenter. So his dad would have been a carpenter. His grandpa would have been a carpenter. You passed down the family trade. But everybody in that house would also have been coming from different walks of life. You would have had different people with different struggles, different sins, different experiences. So Joseph's family, what you would have had there is you would have had an average family, an average working class family, carpenters. So that's one group. The other group that shows up that day would have been the shepherds. So if you go to Luke chapter 2, verse 15, when the angels went away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go over to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us." And they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. And when they saw it, they made known the saying that had been told them concerning this child. And all who heard it wondered at what the shepherds had told them. But Mary treasured up all these things, pondering them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen as it had been told them. So here's the second group of people that would have been there that night. You would have had the shepherds. Who are the shepherds? Well, the shepherds would have been, again, working class, but also very much poor, very much uneducated, very much on the fringe of society. Now, shortly after his birth, there's a third group that would appear, right? You would have had the Magi, the wise men. They would have appeared as they would have come as well. And in Matthew chapter 2, verse 10 to 11, you read, when they saw the star, that's the wise men, when the wise men saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They fell down and worshipped him. And opening the treasures, they offered his gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The wise men are a completely different kind of people, right? So Joseph's family and the shepherds, they're Jewish. The wise men aren't. They're Gentiles. They're from Persia. The Joseph's family and especially the shepherds, they would have been lowly. They would have been poor. Well, these people, the wise men, they're very influential. They're very rich. They give gifts to this king, this baby. Joseph and the shepherds, they were average, everyday, working type people. The wise men are philosophers, they're learned men. So what you have here is you have the learned and the lowly, the average and the influential, the poor and the rich, the Jew and the Gentile. Now we fast forward to Jesus' ministry, we see again this reality of Jesus being surrounded by all types of people. Think about it. Who are his disciples? Well, you have Peter, James, and John, and Andrew. They're all fishermen. Well, what would that be? Working class people. You have Matthew, a tax collector. Well, what would he have been? He would have been a social outcast. He would have been a traitor, seen by Rome as a traitor because he was betraying his people, and then seen by the Jewish people as a traitor because he was betraying his own people. So who else do you have? Well, interesting enough, we don't really focus on this one, but we have Simon the Zealot. He was given to a political movement. He was given to the uprising the overthrow of Rome. Well, what else do we have? Well, we have Jesus who sits down with a whole host of people, sinners, tax collectors. He sat down with Zacchaeus. He said, Zacchaeus, I want to come to your place to sit down with you. Wow. Well, okay. What about this? Who did Jesus permit to come to him? Well, you had religious people, very learned people. You had Nicodemus, very learned person, very much knew the Old Testament, very much religious. And they had a sit down on an evening. You have him allowing hurting people, sick people to come to him, not just come to him, but cling to him, touch him. This week, the ladies have been learning about the Gospel of Mark, and the Gospel of Mark is a story of a woman with a blood issue, and Jesus allowed this woman to touch her, but not only that, he actually drew attention to her. Jesus is not ashamed to draw attention, to welcome and to receive a whole host of people, even people with disgraceful pasts, or you even have good stuff. You have like the triumphal entry, right? A whole host of people, and what are they doing? They're rejoicing, they're happy, they're glad. This is the day. The king has come. So you have a lot of people, different people from different backgrounds that he's permitting to come to him, and then he also goes to people. He went to those that were demon possessed to free them. He went to the hurting. He went to others. So what we see at the manger, we see in his ministry. He's surrounded by a variety of people. The learned and the lowly, the average and the influential, the poor and the rich, the happy and the hurting, the Jew and the Gentile. Does this change? No. As we fast forward to the cross, we see this again. Go with me to Luke chapter 23. Luke 23, starting in verse 33, Jesus is on the cross, and just notice the people that are around him. So in verse 33, we read, and when they came to the place that is called the skull, there they crucified him, and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They cast lots to divide his garments, and the people stood by watching, but the ruler scoffed at him, saying, he saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, if you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, this is the king of the Jews. And if you go down to verse starting in verse 44. It was now after the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw that he had taken place, he praised God, saying, certainly this man was innocent. And all the crowds that had assembled for the spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home, beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. So who do we have in this story? Who is he surrounded by? Well, we have criminals, one on his left, one on his right. One of these criminals would entrust faith, trust and faith, believe in Jesus and be saved. Who else do you have? Well, you have average people. In verse 35, it says, and the people stood by watching. So average collection of people. You also have religious rulers. In verse 35, he says, but the rulers scoffed at him. Who else do you have? You have Gentile soldiers, the Roman centurion. Verse 36, the soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine. One of these soldiers, as we know, as we read, he would realize that this person that's on the cross is truly innocent and he is the Son of God. Who else do you have? You have acquaintances, you have family, you have friends. Again, he's surrounded by a variety of people. So what you see at the manger, you see in his ministry, and you see at the cross. He's surrounded by a variety of people, the learned and the lowly, the average and the influential, the poor and the rich, the Jew and the Gentile. So when we go back to Luke chapter 2, verse 7, we read this. She gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling cloths and laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the guest room. Because there is no room in the guest room, he's born in the main room of the house, and he's not isolated from people. He's rather surrounded by people, a variety of people. What we have starting at his birth is a message. Here's the message. It's simple, yet it's profound, and it's something we need to always keep at the forefront of our mind. And here's the message. Jesus is for all sorts of people. Luke chapter 2, verse 10, in the angel's message, the angel said, fear not, for behold, I bring you great good news of great joy that will be for all the people. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Jesus is for all sorts of people. In his life, he surrounds himself with an assortment of people, teaching them, pointing them to the Father. In his life, he serves all sorts of people, touching and healing the hurting and the sick. In his death, he pays the penalty to those who respond to him in faith, regardless of their status, regardless of their background. Jesus is not just for a select few, he is for all people. And this message begins at the manger. Today we lit the love candle. And thank you, Doug and Kara, for doing that and reminding us of what love is. Love is not merely an emotion. Love is an action. The verse that we were memorizing this week reminded us of that. Little children, let us not love only with word and in talk, but in deed and in action. Love is an activity. Love is doing good towards another. And that's what Jesus has done. He has done good towards us. In the greatest, most possible way, he has done good towards us. He came and lived the life that we could never live. He came to die so that we may be forgiven. That is the greatest need. That is our greatest need, to be forgiven, to be brought back into a relationship with God. And Jesus has come to do that. He did the greatest good. And he's not dead and buried and gone. Jesus is alive. He rose from the dead 3 days later. And now he is with the Father, and he continues to do good. For us that put our faith and trust in him, he stands as our advocate. He stands as our mediator between us and the Father. He continues to do good. Love is an action. And we could stop there, but we can even think of the second advent. He's coming again. He is coming again, and all the injustices that have happened, that will happen, will be corrected. All the difficulties, all the challenges, all the curse of sin will be eliminated. And we will be with him. We will see God. He will be ours and we will be his. Love is not merely an emotion, it's an action. It is to do good towards other people. God has done the greatest good. Now we add to this, love also is to do good towards people regardless of their background. Or their background, their status, their relationship. That's what Jesus did. He met the needs of all sorts of people, not just his friends, not just those who were favorable towards him. In fact, he did what was good towards his enemy. That was us. While we were yet sinners, he died for us. But it's not only to do good towards all types of people, it's also to do good regardless of the cost. I mean, there was a cost involved. There was a cost involved from him going from heaven to earth. He went from the glories of heaven to a humble manger. He went from being the object of praise and worship and glory to a place where he would often be despised and overlooked. He went from a place that was perfect to a place that was hurting. And then he laid down his life for us. Friends, that's love. He showed us love. Christmas is a wonderful time. It's a time when we can stop and we can consider the birth of our Savior. But we can never separate the manger from the cross. There is a picture that I had come across a few years ago. And it was a clip art, and there was two images. There was a manger where Jesus was laid, and behind the manger was a cross. When we come to Christmas, we need our eyes on both. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Why did he come? He came to give his life. The perfect gift to us.